Hey there, thank you for tuning into this presentation where I'm going to be telling you today about some research I did important for conservation of an endangered cat here in the US. So without further ado, I'm going to launch into the presentation. Okay. So what I'm going to be telling you about today is a project I did to assess microhabitat conditions at newly established camera sites for detecting endangered ocelots at the East Foundation's El Sal's Ranch near Port Mansfield, Texas. The East Foundation, just to provide some background, owns 6 private ranches in deep South Texas that total over 200,000 acres. And the East Foundation's mission is to do ranching, to do research, and to do education. And really they're supporting wildlife conservation and land stewardship in Texas. And I was lucky enough to have a fall 2020 wildlife management internship with the East Foundation. My name is Lindsay and I'm from Central Montana. I went to college in Princeton, New Jersey, but this fall was my first time working in Texas, my first time getting to look at bobwhite quail and of course, endangered ocelots. And I came here because I'm an aspiring wildlife conservationist. I wanted the chance to help with on-the-ground conservation efforts and also learn more about private lands conservation like that the East Foundation does. So just to give you a bit of background on my project, let me move this. So endangered ocelots in the United States, it's a cat species that there are fewer than 80 of them living in the United States, residents in the United States. And they're a notoriously elusive species. They're nocturnal and they live in the very thickest of brush and woody cover. Because that's where they can find cover, they can find prey, and they can find den sites. But this is an endangered species that we need to research and understand so that we can conserve it. But you can't do it by observation. You've got to do it by, say, trapping the animals and putting GPS collars on them, or by detecting them with camera traps. And that's something that CKWRI, the Cesar Kleberg Wildlife Research Institute in Kingsville, Texas, has been doing at the El Sal's Ranch since 2011. So for almost the past decade, CKWRI has had 28 camera sites on the El Sal's Ranch. And those sites are on a gridded array across the ranch where they're about 1 kilometer apart each. And at each camera site, there'll be 2 cameras facing opposite directions so they can take a photo of the front and both sides of these ocelots to capture their stripes and their spots, and then use those patterns to distinguish different individuals. And what have they found from doing this research over the last 10 years? Some great stuff. First, they've detected over 30 individual ocelots on the El Sal's Ranch. And that's incredible since there's only about 80 of them in the entire country. And those 30 individuals, they occur on this private El Sal's Ranch. So the East Foundation has a huge role in recovery and conservation of the ocelot, and they also are hugely responsible for this species' viability into the future. Another thing they've found with these camera trap research projects over the last decade is that these ocelot cats, they like woody cover, they like brush, and they prefer larger and less fragmented patches of that brush. So that means they want more space and they want it to be less edgy. They want good quality stuff. And this is super important for management and conservation of ocelots because you need to be protecting, maybe creating, or even connecting these big patches of brush because that's where the ocelots want to make their home. Meanwhile, at a microhabitat level, so right when you're standing on the ground where these camera sites are at versus looking above at the size of the woody cover around them, they actually haven't seen any effects on what ocelots prefer at that micro level. And it's something where future research was needed. So what is happening this year? Well, in 2020, the Cesar Kleberg Wildlife Research Institute has the opportunity to add 21 new camera sites to their existing grid on El Sal's. You can see from this map here, the red ones are their old ones from 2011 and yellow are the new ones. With these new sites, they're getting to cover new ground, pushing west on both of these sort of southwest and northwest corners. They're also connecting sort of this northern part and southern part because individual cats can be moving between there. And ultimately, by studying new areas, they're probably going to find new individual ocelots. That'll give us, better idea of how many are actually out there, and it'll also help with these occurrence and density estimates, where we can understand, for this amount of habitat, how many ocelots can live there. Of course, that's going to be really important for conservation and recovery of this endangered species. The last thing about these new sites is that whereas the old ones tend to be in this real green, these real thick brush, the new ones are getting to these smaller and edgier and patchier areas of brush, at the peripheries. And that's places where maybe you wouldn't expect to see an ocelot, but it's important to check those out. Just to show you visually here, this is looking out over the northwest part of the Alsaus Ranch, and it's basically a closed canopy forest of live oak trees and thorn scrub types of habitat. But other parts of Alsaus, they're grassland with mottes of trees, or grassland leading into sort of edges of forest. And we want to know, are the ocelots using those patchier little habitats? And this is super important to think about, because perhaps in the future you're going to see ocelots being introduced into new areas, onto new ranches to expand their numbers and start new populations. But not every ranch is going to be lucky enough to have this closed canopy forest like this to put ocelots in. Maybe they look something more like that. And we need to know whether ocelots can persist in that kind of habitat. So what was I up to this fall? I got to go to 11, circled in white here, of those 14 new camera sites. On the ground, I got to see what kind of woody plant species were there, how brushy and thick it was in terms of horizontal cover. I got to look at the height of a shrub canopy, if there was one, and an upper overhead tree canopy. Just to give you a sense of what that means, I would go to each of these camera sites. I would stick this white and orange board right in the middle, and then I would go out and get at ocelot level and estimate how much of this board was being covered by brush for the horizontal cover. If it was 100%, I was looking at a wall of brush, and that's what the ocelot would have to walk through. If it was 0%, there's nothing there and it's very open. And of course, we would also measure this sort of lower level of a shrub canopy, a first layer that the ocelot maybe would be walking under, and then an upper canopy from sort of the trees in this patch. And let me tell you first a bit qualitatively about some of these new ocelot camera sites. So 8 of them were in habitats where the plant species were honey mesquite trees, acacia trees, lime prickly ash, spiny hackberry, all sorts of really nice stuff that actually hurts a lot that you would call thorn scrub. And that's what this looks like right here. And those 8 thorn scrub sites were in some interesting spots. One of them was inside a fenced off cattle pen or cattle trap. There's a couple that were near some water points, whether that be natural ponds or even a well inside of this cattle pen. Had an ocelot camera right by there. And there's also some near some plots of cordgrass, which are of a lot of interest to folks ranching in South Texas. And we want to see, what do ocelots have to think about cordgrass? And then finally, 3 of these new sites were in sort of live oak forests that look like this, where you tend to have some trees with pretty intense canopies, and it tended to be a little bit dark underneath there. So next, let me show you a little bit of data about these new sites. First, I'm showing you right here the horizontal cover, the thickness of the brush at the old sites versus the new ones. While the new sites were trending towards being thicker at the very lowest level, 0 to 1/2 meter, at the intermediate, 1/2 to 1 meter, and the highest, 1 meter to 2 meters, they're actually significantly thicker, more brushy, more coverage at the old sites than the new ones. And what this tells us is that these new sites that they've established are unique. They're going to be looking at it. It's a different kind of habitat, and we get to see how ocelots are using that space. And of course, you wouldn't want to put cameras, these new cameras, in exactly the same spots as they used to be in terms of what the habitat is like. Additionally, I showed you that map before of what it looks like from the aerial image, where these new sites seem to be in edgier and patchier places. And you can see that on the ground here, that translates to being less brushy in the actual site. The other thing I'd like to share is the difference between live oak and thorn scrub sites. This is just showing from the new 2020 sites that at each of those height profiles in terms of the cover, they're trending towards being thicker at the thorn scrub, which is the honey mesquite and acacias versus the live oaks. So it's brushier in the thorn scrub, and ocelots are known to like the brushier habitat. So we'll have to see where the ocelots pop up on these cameras more. And perhaps the reason for why it's looking brushier at the thorn scrub than the live oak is because the live oak sites have significantly higher overhead canopies. So the trees at the live oak sites are significantly higher than the thorn scrub ones. It seems like the live oaks are bigger, they're more mature, they're creating more of a closed canopy where then you have less growth underneath. Whereas that scrubby thorn scrub, smaller trees, perhaps these are just, you know, younger patches of cover. Maybe it was cleared and they're coming back now. But the thorn scrub is thicker on the ground with shorter trees. The live oak higher and less going on underneath. And so looking ahead, what's going to happen? Well, these new cameras that they put out have enough battery life and memory space to last for about 6 months. So come the springtime of 2021, we'll be able to go and pick up those cameras and see where are we seeing ocelots? How many individuals are we seeing? How often are they using these different habitats? From there, we'll get to update our occupancy models, our density estimates for the ocelot population on this El Sal's ranch here. We'll also get to look at just what I was talking about there with the microhabitat effects. Are the brushier areas leading to more ocelots? Are the live oak getting more ocelots than the thorn scrub? They'll also be looking at the macro habitat, looking at using these satellite images to measure the size and the shape of different patches of habitat at the new sites and figure out which ones the ocelots like best. And presumably the places where you see the most ocelots, that's the habitat that they prefer, and that's the habitat you want to manage for, try to protect and create in order to conserve and recover this endangered species. So I'd like to say thank you to the feline research team, especially Dr. Lombardi from the feline research team, for letting me be part of this project and help them out. The range ecology technicians with the East Foundation this fall, Curtis Fisher, Ash Ellers, and Alyssa Freeman, helped me with my fieldwork for this project. And then I'm very grateful to all of the East Foundation for giving me the opportunity to have this internship and work on this project. I'm a lifelong wildcat and endangered cat enthusiast, so it meant a lot to me to be able to walk where endangered ocelots walk. And also say that I came into the internship wanting to learn more about private lands conservation, and I definitely did. I got to learn the joys, but also the challenges of conserving an endangered species on private lands, and in the importance of practicing good land stewardship to protect that species. I also learned that private lands, just because they're owned by one family or foundation, they're still multi-use, they're not single use. I was familiar with multi-use for public lands, Forest Service and BLM in Montana where I grew up, but now I know that private lands are too. And private lands are so important in Texas because it's 90% of the state. And on these private lands, they could be balancing ranching, wildlife conservation, research, hunting, resource development, all these different things. And hopefully they practice good land stewardship while they're doing it. And then finally, again, you know, private lands, maybe they're owned by one person, but it's so important to have partnerships when you're doing conservation, whether that be with university research partners, with neighbors, with agencies, with communities that you're doing outreach to. The key, it seems, to success in private lands conservation is working together with other people and developing partnerships. And I'm very grateful to have gotten to learn these things and be part of this project this year. And I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and you're welcome to ask me any questions in the comments. Thanks very much for tuning in today.